Welcome to Sonic Subcultures Season 1. I'm one of your hosts, Safa Hachi. Over this series, we'll look at 9 records that represent the range of musical styles that fall under the nu metal banner. Each record represents an aspect of nu metal that's surprisingly finding itself back in the current music landscape. Considering I'm late to the game, I'm wondering how nu metal is back and why. To find some answers, Marc, Lajeunesse, and I look back at each record, do a deep dive on the content of the record such as its form, lyrics, and impact. From that, with the help of our differing perspectives, we piece together what each record means now in the present day.
Today we're doing Stain's Break the Cycle. Early in 2024, I opened YouTube and the algorithm gave me something strange. A video titled Aaron Lewis, Let's Go Fishing. Aaron Lewis, I thought to myself, that's the guy from Stained. Why is this on my YouTube feed? Stained was a hybrid nu metal soft rock act that had become popular in the middle of 2001 when their song It's Been a While made it into heavy rotation on alternative radio stations. Though they were most famous for their generally accessible radio singles, like It's Been a While and Outside, from their second studio album Break the Cycle, Stained was part of the nu metal ecosystem. Limp Bizkit frontman Fred Durst was instrumental in securing Stained a record deal, and they were co-headliners of the second iteration of the Family Values Tour, alongside Limp Bizkit and Filter. Outside of memes about how annoyingly pervasive It's Been a While had become, I hadn't thought about Stained since 2001. I hadn't been searching for nu metal on YouTube around this time. So how did this end up in my feed? Regardless, curiosity got the best of me, so I clicked the video. Much to my surprise, country music starts to play as Aaron Lewis stands in the foreground in front of a pickup truck before it cuts to a shot of Aaron fishing on a riverbank. The lyrics, which I will not recount in full, gesture towards societal troubles. You gotta work 2 jobs and rob a bank to put food on the table and gas in your tank. And everybody knows who's to blame, but I ain't gonna worry about none of that shit today. I stared, eyes squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the lead singer of Stained making this country music turn. Then more lyrics hit. Let's go Karen, let's go Brandon, and let's go fishing. We can make America great again, turn right on a 2-track, and turn off CNN. I pulled up Google to find that Aaron Lewis of the band Stained had found a resurgence of his own as a country artist making MAGA folk music. And my first thought was, huh? How did this nu metal act become a MAGA guy? In my mind, as a nu metal fan in my teens, it felt anti-establishment, countercultural, and extremely suspect of political authority. Certainly, Mr. Lewis could have had an ideological change of heart, but I couldn't help but wonder if this kind of political position was always there in the nu metal genre, nestled somewhere between metal zone pedals and frequent exclamations of general rage. Maybe nu metal wasn't really what I thought it was when I was just an angry teenager. I get flashbacks now to Limp Bizkit's 1999 Nookie music video to a scene where a crowd, led by Fred Durst, emerges from an alley adorned in backwards red ball caps, and I wonder, is Donald Trump just nu metal the guy? What even were the politics in the genre, and was there some portent to this kind of trajectory for a nu metal artist that we can see in a certified hit record like Stain's Break the Cycle from 2001 before Donald Trump was even on the political scene? Thinking about it, I know exactly why this ended up in my algorithm. I was doing research on right-wing disinformation when this song came up. So, as the intro indicated, we're here to talk about Safa's new favorite record, Stain's Break the Cycle from 2001, released on Flip/Elektra. So, this record, for some context, before I ask you about how you felt about your first listen, which I have some idea about where this is going.
Yeah.
I want to start us off and our listeners off with something perhaps shocking, which is that according to Rolling Stone magazine in 2001, when this album came out in May of 2001, it debuted at number 1 with 716,000 units sold in the first week. And it was the second highest selling debut of that year, beating out Janet Jackson, Destiny's Child.
Beyonce, no.
Yes. And even in like its own musical area, the week before this record came out, Tool's Lateralis came out. And this sold more than that. There's only one band that managed to beat out Stained, and maybe it explains a lot. Dave Matthews Band.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So before we get into some more history with some reviews about Stained's record, this is the first time you've heard it, right?
Yeah, I didn't know. They were, out of the entire like list that we decided to talk about this podcast, they were the only band that I did not know.
Which is fascinating because out of all the bands on our list, they, I think, by far had the most radio play.
That's so interesting.
At least acutely. Rage Against the Machine, maybe over time. Limp Bizkit. Nookie was huge, but Stained was enormous.
Why?
Well, we'll get into that in a second. So, in terms of your first listen, just that first reaction that you had, what did this record do to you?
Meh. That's honestly all I've got. Listen, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. Like, nothing really stood out to me. I feel like the mix of soft and not so soft tracks like didn't blend out really well. Like,
right.
I'd be somewhat jamming or like trying to jam out to a song and I'd be like, okay, the guitar's picking up, this is good. And then boom, like instant mood shift when Aaron would start singing in a softer, twangy voice. He was telling us that he was about to switch up on us, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
We've mentioned in previous episodes with Limp Bizkit, for example, that a lot of new metal records are kind of just complaining about society and life and the government. Mm-hmm. And it feels like he's just kind of complaining about how much he sucks. Like the poor guy has daddy issues and I don't know, like just kind of wasn't a fan of it. Really, nothing like like it ended. I listened to it twice in a row and I was kind of just like, okay, like I'm good to move on. Yeah,
no, there was a whole long line of bad father rock that this really tapped into. And then in terms of like its sound, it almost alternates with a few exceptions where there's a couple hard quotations around that.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Tracks back to back, but really it alternates mid-rock, new metal hybrid style track into soft rock, country inflected something.
And which
soft rock.
Reddit calls butt rock, which I didn't know until.
Okay. Did you was there any like what is this? What is butt rock? Is there
apparently
any greater explanation for how the internet is reacting to Stained in 2024?
Yes, I have a definition here. I pulled this up because I was going to ask, like, did you guys consider it butt rock too, or is butt rock a new thing?
I'll get into the history of this in a moment.
It says, according to Google, butt rock is a subgenre of hard rock and rock and roll, music that often criticized for its lack of artistic merit and melodic complexity, and other example, like it says, Google said other examples include Nickelback.
yeah, okay. No, I could see that, how they're kind of lumped together, but their trajectories are very different. And this is the thing that makes Stained really interesting to me. Because, I mean, if you look at their record, the cover as well, it doesn't look like a Nickelback record, which is like browns. It looks like The Living Room. Stained's is like blue and black. Their record before this, Dysfunction, is, I think, a clown on just a black background with like hard orange text to really give you that this is intense. And then their self-released record called Tormented has a knife through a Bible and then like a Barbie on a cross. It was really that early new metal edgy look. Like
anything that'll make people go, whoa, just on one.
These guys are dark.
They're
like
scary.
They're scary. This guy's dad and him did not get along, and it has produced an outcome.
Definitely.
Right? Is what that was about. But then when you crack into the record, it kind of sounds like Nickelback. Ish. Not the harder tracks, because they do fit in with the new metal scene, even though I think the thing that this band is known for isn't reflective of that Limp Bizkit sound, that Korn sound, Rob Zombie, all the other stuff we're going to do on this podcast. It doesn't really seem to fit in, especially if you're listening to this record, Break the Cycle, right?
Yeah.
So I want to get a sense of how does this even happen, right? Because The song that this band became the most famous for, there are actually two, but the first one is the soft rock jam, It's Been a While, right? Which, if you were alive at this time, not only was this played on like alternative radio, and this is the reason this record was so big, this song in particular was cross genre. So a bunch of different radio stations, so your soft rock stations would pick it up. Your general pop hits stations also picked it up because anyone could listen to this.
Yeah.
Whereas Nookie had a bit more of a specific kind of appeal, and then Korn was only played on like alternative radio. Like it didn't make it to soft rock or anything.
More the
right?
mainstream side.
Yeah, so Staind was able to get a wider array of things, right? And then you turn on the record, and then I imagine those listeners get the other end of this, which is this goes a bit too hard for me, which is a thing, shocking as it may be for folks with our taste.
Feeling
but like,
badass listening to
yeah,
Staind.
exactly, where they put on that first track and like, yeah, there are problems in society.
I hate my dad too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that kind of thing. But okay, so it's easy to make fun of Staind for that, but that was Korn's whole MO for forever. Still might be.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But there's also a thing where in 2001, nu metal is kind of softening a little bit. You have like your drowning pool, you're like you let the bodies hit the floor. Linkin Park does a lot more with clean vocals and really subdued rapping around this time too.
Yeah.
And so Staind is kind of a flagship of successful accessibilizing the genre for people such that it no longer really resembles the genre, right? But they do have the bona fides. So this is the thing, is like where does this band, where does It's Been a While, and then their other track, which is almost the same as that, I'm on the outside. It's like the same. Those are the two tracks that they're most famous for. And apparently Outside is more famous than It's Been a While, which to me is crazy because you could not turn on the radio and go 30 minutes without hearing It's Been a While on some station.
And I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah, it was a time. But how do we get to It's Been a While on like every radio station that plays anything remotely rock related? Well, I watched an interview with Aaron Lewis tell this story. This had been rumored for a long time. There had been like Staind lore about how they got into the business, and he just spilled the beans. So he was giving an interview with Rock Feed, and he's also wearing a U.S. Border Patrol hat as he's giving this interview, which will become important. Which is that Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit was on a show with them very early on in their career, and he almost kicked them off the show because they weren't signed yet, and all they had was that self-released record, Tormented. And he saw the record, slid it down the bar towards the band where they were hanging out before their set, and was like, "Are you guys Satan worshipers?" Which, to my surprise, Fred Durst did not like.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is one of those things about nu metal. It's all about that aesthetic. Like, it's not about conviction, and
It actually has to fit the mold.
Exactly. It's, for the most part, what I'm finding as I'm doing the research for these different records, with a couple exceptions to this, the lyrics are not full of conviction and belief. It's really aesthetic. And although I do think Aaron Lewis is honest about him not liking his dad, and Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit honest about doing it all for the nookie, I think there is truth, but all the things that surround it, I'm not seeing a lot of that there. So all that to say, Fred Durst was going to kick them off the show. Aaron Lewis and their guitar player, Mike Mushok, were like, no, we just did this. We don't like Satan, really. It's just a record.
Don't worry.
He was like, okay. And then he watched their whole set, and then immediately after that set was like, I'm going to get you guys a record deal. And he did. And that's how Staind came to existence. And if you were around in 2004, and I guess these guys are back now, also Puddle of Mud, who had this song, She Hates Me, which is, again, to quote Safa quoting Reddit, butt rock.
Definitely.
Also brought into prominence by Fred Durst. And so these folks are the legacy of what nu metal allowed the popular nu metal artists to bring into the mainstream music fold, which isn't nu metal at all.
It's so interesting compared to his own sound and his own look. Unless he's secretly doing it on purpose, like he's trying to bring in more variety or something, or make his sound stick out the most. I don't know.
I think he just likes this kind of thing. I think he just enjoys vibing to the soft rock sound of melodically simple soft rock with folks who he probably feels are in that same nu metal community mindset. Going back to why we've scoped this podcast about nu metal as we have with all these different artists that kind of tangentially fit in is because nu metal was a scene more than a genre. It was people who were around, right? And that's why, like, the thing that really put Staind in the nu metal sphere before they had their radio breakthrough was being on the second iteration of the Family Values tour in 1999. That was the big nu metal tour.
Yeah.
They were on it with Limp Bizkit, the band Filter, which really only had 2 big singles, and they kind of faded into obscurity. And it was Staind. They were co-headlining, the 3 of them. And Staind was doing it off the back of a self-released record, and then Dysfunction, which was kind of, it's silly to say this about nu metal, but it was kind of like a deep cut in that Staind, before Break the Cycle, and it's been a while, and their radio breakout, they were the band you listened to if you were like deep into nu metal.
Oh, like you were like cooler for knowing them?
Yeah, that's what they were. They were like the legitimizer of like, are you really into nu metal? Because you're not just going to be listening to $3 Bill Y'all or Follow the Leader. You're gonna have heard Staind's Dysfunction.
Okay, maybe that's why they're having such a hard time like resurfacing to the newer generations. It's I think it's interesting that you bring up Fred Durst kind of signing bands like Staind, because it's not that nu metal is a genre; it's more like a movement. Because looking into like, oh, if Staind was popular, when I say nothing on social media, other than Staind's own account, Aaron Lewis's Instagram, which, once again, we'll get into why that's important, there's, like, nothing really on Staind being popular, Staind being liked, not even Staind being hated, just, like, nothing about them is being talked about, like, at all. And it's not just, it's, like, not to say that Generation Z thinks that aesthetics matter, but I think that just in the way that their look was so neutral, just as like their sound was kind of neutral, there's nothing to cling on to enough that we would want to bring them back. They're kind of just staying where they need to stay.
Yeah,
I guess.
For sure. And I do think they were propelled forward a bit by really one track off of Dysfunction. And this is probably the thing that Fred Durst saw. When we got to Dysfunction, the record, in 1999, where was I? I was a young person learning how to play guitar, and you start by like learning like regular rock songs that are easy 4-chord progressions, simple stuff. Like if you start liking harder music, you're like, how do I actually figure out how to do this, right? So me and my buds were in like our little cover band of tracks where we're doing the simplest songs possible, and one of their songs does get on the radio from Dysfunction, but it's one of those like after 11 songs where it's a bit too hard for regular daytime rotation. It's called Mud Shovel, and it's not a hard song to play. But one of the things that the guitarist does on the track is using harmonics and just distortion. So there's no extra pedals. There's nothing complex here. He does this ascending, descending harmonic line, which is again and again. And it goes pretty hard when you're 13 and you're like, oh, this is heavier stuff than Hey Jude, right? Like that's what it did. And the thing about that line is that compared to something like Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, who has like similar sounding stuff, but he achieves a lot of that through effects pedals, this you can just do with a Marshall amp, like a practice amp, and any guitar on an open string, and you just drag your finger across it. It's really easy to do, and it does sound heavy. Like you can impress your friends with this and not know how to play guitar.
Like cool and accessible.
And I think everyone who was in this phase of their life, which is like young and aspiring to heavy music, whatever that meant for a 13-year-old to what
at the time.
But I think there were 20-year-olds doing this too, where they were like, oh, I didn't know how to do that. Now I know how to do it, because it was an easy thing to learn. This song was that for that era.
And it puts you in the space immediately. Like now you are a nu metal enjoyer, listener, player kind of.
Yeah, and then you go pick up this record, and I think without critically thinking about it, you're just like, yeah, Staind, it's great, huh? Mud Shovel, right?
Yeah.
And then cut 2 years later, It's Been a While is on the radio all the time, and something happened, which I'll get into in a sec. I want to do the historical context for a bit, and then I want to talk about, because I have to fully admit, I bought Break the Cycle when it came out, and young me believed he liked it. And I have to explain this to myself, which I will.
I appreciate the honesty.
You. No, I mean, you got to be honest about it, because in trying to figure out what nu metal is actually about, I have to reflect on, why did I even like this? What worked? Because, my relationship with my dad, not amazing, but he's a nice guy. You know what I mean? That part is not the part that resonates. So what did? All right. But I want to get into a couple reviews just to round out the historical context. So I found two here from 2001. The first is by Laura Morgan, and it's just a single paragraph. That Stain's dejected new single, It's Been a While, has already topped radio charts, shows teens still have a hearty appetite for derivative grunge. Aaron Lewis sounds like a contentious Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam. He bitches more than moans, but these Fred Durst-discovered mooks are also adept at the kind of tuneless rage neo-metalheads live for. Count on shrewd marketing to propel this conventional effort. See. And then there's one from Terry Bezer, who talks about how good this record is. Kind of.
Kind of.
Unless you've been living on the moon as of late, you will have heard of Stained, Fred Durst's big guns that have taken America by storm. On listening to Break the Cycle, the only question you're left asking yourself is, how? Now we've seen in the past that American audiences are easily persuaded by the next big thing tag. Just look at Creed and Crazy Town, for example. But this is ridiculous. Hell, even the UK have been duped into the Stained trap with the album debuting at #1 in the album charts. That's right, it wasn't just the United States, it was all over the place. The first thing that hits you is Aaron Lewis has an amazing voice. There's no disputing this. Well,
no disputing?
The man sounds like a grunge choir boy, all types of ranges, and an ability to write a superb vocal line. This is where the praise stops. Because halfway through the record, you realize what a miserable, whining bastard the man is. Hell, the band have had on record the most depressing hit single in recent memory with It's Been a While. It's been a while since I can say I love myself, whinges the baldy frontman.
Jesus.
This is like, an aside here, just the formal elements of music reviews in this era, terrible. I feel like anyone could just do this and write whatever they wanted. Continuing. For Christ's sake, Aaron, cheer up. There are people worse off than yourself, and you just end up sounding like the rock equivalent of Stan Collymore. I actually don't know who that is. I apologize. This is what puts you off Stained. The music is occasionally inspired, and Stained have a penchant for writing an amazingly powerful ballad, but the packaged teen angst is just irritating. Contrary to popular belief, Stained are not the answer to grunge's musical problems. Grunge at this point, fairly well over. They are nothing but a mediocre band in a mediocre genre, rude. Durst, you may have got away with Chocolate Starfish, which we'll cover on our last episode of the season, but on this one, you are surely taking the piss. Let's hope Stained fade away quickly and vanish without a trace. Can't wait for Puddle of Mud. Insert sarcasm here. 4 out of 10.
Oh my God.
And that was one of the more positive reviews of this I could find. And yet, again, hugely successful record. Not universally enjoyed by critics. And the longer this song was out, the more everyone started to hate Stained. This is where I'm going to get into a question about taste, because I was one of the ones who enjoyed this record. And in my little like grade 9 high school new metal cover band, myself and my guitar player both really liked this record. I think some of the first music that really made him start to develop as a guitar player, to learn skills, was learning It's Been a While, Outside, Mud Shovel from the prior record.
There you go.
And we unironically enjoyed this stuff. But I will say our bass player, a guy who I always think has good taste, was immediately like, guys, this is terrible.
He knew.
Stained sucks. Why are you listening to this? I can't believe you like this. And we were like, no, it's good. Here's why. And then 6 months later, we're like, oh man, he was right again.
You were right.
And he always is. Always a man of impeccable taste. He's way ahead of the curve. So what actually did this? And I think it's actually that we weren't really listening. Aside from that thing I was talking about, which is like, it was something achievable. But I think it's achievable for everyone. And this is where it's like the melodic simplicity of it all. Anyone can sing It's Been a While. That's why there are so many impressions of It's Been a While. Even on Critical Role, which is a Dungeons & Dragons role-playing live stream. It's one of I think it is the most successful channel on Twitch. If you watch their campaigns, once in a while, they'll bust out It's Been a While in the middle of their game. Just because if you were around at that time, it's so omnipresent. And in talking about the politics of it all, what new metal as a genre lets you do, what this record does really well, is it lets you cherry pick the things you want to hear and go like, oh, that line, that's the one I resonate with, right? because he has some political social commentary on this, though it's not amazing. The first track of this record, you could confuse the lyrics for a more political oriented act if you're only just looking at them in a vacuum, right? As I walk along these streets, I see a man that walks alone, distant echo of people's feet, has no place to call his own, the man I'm assuming. A shot rings out from a roof overhead, shootings in America. A crackhead asks for change nearby, that's a quote from the lyrics. An old man lies in an alleyway dead.
Okay.
A little girl lost just stands there and cries, right? Where you're like, well, okay, so he's trying to get to something about drugs and gun violence and poverty in America. None of the rest of the record is about anything like this. And also, as I look back at these lyrics, this is very Nancy Grace, those kind of like shock journalists, outrage journalists, in terms of the way the messaging is set up here, right? Where it's like, I'm putting something vaguely political. I'm actually not going to talk too much about what I actually think about all this, but I'm going to give you something here. If you're like, if you want to believe that this is about something, you can let yourself think so.
Yeah, like if you want to draw your own conclusions, like,
yeah,
go
exactly.
ahead.
And at the age I was when this came out, I was like, oh, deep. He cares about drugs in America.
That's so
Which
cool.
I was just a little kid in Canada with not these problems. You know what I mean? But you're like, oh, he cares.
In a way, like, I guess the more we're talking about it, like, it's kind of boring in a way that he's not diving into it as much as like a band like Rage Against the Machine, maybe.
Yeah, or System of a Down.
Yeah. But it kind of gives, I guess, the audience the chance to, like you said, interpret the lyrics in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of that coin, like you said, it really does just make it seem like it's a lot more deep than it is when it's not. I have, for example, a lyric highlighted from Suffer. In the second verse, he says, "The hate you feel won't go away. You're all programmed to feel this way." And I'm like, okay, he's getting into like governments, like indoctrinating minds and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then no, he just goes back into whining about how much he hates himself. And
yeah, I mean, like on the Limp Bizkit episode, it was the same kind of thing where, they have all those exclamations about like, you are the problem. I'm upset. It's the same kind of thing expressed in a different mode where it lets you deploy the lyrics in the way you want to. Nu metal as a genre has so much ambiguity, and dropping lines because they're edgy, which without much context for what they're actually supposed to mean for the listener. And so I have a lot of trouble going back and actually thinking like, what was this genre about? And specifically for this, what is this record about? Which is the next prompt I have for this podcast discussion. And other than self-loathing, I actually had nothing.
I don't think he knows either, though. Like, I think we're kind of giving them, well, we're not necessarily saying this, but in a way we're kind of giving them credit by saying that they're opening up the discussion to have the listeners kind of interpret the lyrics. But I don't even think that they're thinking about it like that. I think that they're like, this is deep. I'm talking about drugs and how much I hate my dad. But they think that like, and that's it. Like even they think that just like barely scratching the surface is being really like deep,
Right. I guess this is the time then to pivot, much like Aaron Lewis did, the frontman of Stained, with his career.
Which we've been alluding to a lot in the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, talked about it in the intro too, but I think we have to get into it just a little bit more now. So Aaron Lewis became effectively he started a country career in like the late 2000s with songs like Granddaddy's Gun, I think came out in 2011, and he had a few other country songs. And then like the story I told in the intro, he has now become effectively a MAGA propagandist. I don't think he would see himself that way. I feel like he's doing this very earnestly, and I don't want to be like, you're a shill for the government. He might be. I don't know. And I think these are just his feelings. The thing that I'm trying to figure out, and the thing that kind of the whole podcast kind of hinges on this, is what is that through line? And you did a little bit of research into what this looks like. What do you see here? Because Stained hasn't had a resurgence, but Aaron Lewis is successful with his MAGA country act. Not for our segment. The thing you told me when we started this podcast, like you hadn't really heard of Stained, and the thing I said back is it's a different algorithm.
Yeah,
like they're not in our feed.
And I ruined my algorithm a bit by looking into him.
Yes, we do. Yes, but let's go fishing.
What we do for research.
Yeah, what we do for research. That's how it works. So what do you think? Because you're the one who's most living now. I'm in the past. You're in the present. What does this look like to you after you heard Break the Cycle? Like, how do we get here?
I mean, we kind of mentioned how his lyrics weren't too deep, but it's kind of a shame to see a person who is kind of scratching the surface of what we think is dismantling bigger ideologies or authoritative figures in society and stuff, and then it just kind of goes the opposite way, where, what he was talking about, was it not what we thought it was, kind of? Like, maybe he thinks that these, like, people who are programming us are actually now the liberals of today, instead of him maybe thinking that it was the government at the time. Like, even I'm kind of grappling with trying to understand where it came from a bit. Maybe it makes more sense if you were in the new metal scene, and like you mentioned in the intro, we kind of see instances of Republican ideologies in Limp Bizkit's music videos sometimes, but I'm still kind of trying to understand that, because I see them as such a like progressive like genre with how Gen Z is interpreting it today.
Yeah.
So I really don't know, honestly.
Yeah, and I think, so you have some lyrics, I believe, to give the listeners a bit more context of like what we're talking about with his current oeuvre of music. Safa, do you want to?
Yes, I would love to.
Drop some bars?
Yeah, let's go. This song titled Made in China, off his most recent album, I believe, called The Hills. And this is it. So, I'm proud of where I'm from. Foreign made or city raised, I'm proud to say I'm neither. And then further down, because I ain't made in China, I'm American as it gets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like, that's all I can say. At a lot of shows, he's like preaching that Trump is the best candidate to come to the scene, and he's going to save us all. I don't know. Yeah,
and this is it. This is the thing. And I actually think it's going to be unresolved here. This episode is effectively a two-parter with our next episode on Rage Against the Machine to kind of figure out how are the politics of nu metal at work. The answer here is just, I think maybe Trump represents just such a destabilization of the status quo, yet much like with Limp Bizkit's Significant Other, it still had tons of misogyny in it. It was a disruption, but it was a familiar disruption. It was the most accessible disruption, and this makes the most sense for them to be like, oh, the thing that I was against is competent exploitation, and this is just so chaotic. And and nu metal is that, because it's unresolved. We've been talking about this record, the feelings, the emotions on it are unresolved. They're chaotic. Aaron Lewis doesn't seem to know what his own feelings are. And maybe that is the case with the current political situation. It's like, I want to live in that mess politically, because that's where my head has been at since 2001, since 1996 with their first record. Maybe that's what this is.
I take it back. You made me critically think about something, and I think that it's really important to bring up. There's this study by Ryan Mayfield, and it's called The Lyrics of Politics, How Music Conveys Political Ideology. And it was interesting because basically, to boil down his entire like wonderful research into just a couple sentences here, his hypothesis states that like metal, country, and religious music are all right-leaning, but hip hop, folk, blues, and soul genres are all left-leaning.
Interesting.
So then when I'm reading this, I'm thinking like, okay, then where does nu metal fall? Because it's literally kind of a mix of those two things.
It's got funk, it's got metal.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, does it make for an apolitical space? Does it give the band a chance to lean on either side? And while I don't completely like agree with his hypothesis completely, I thought of an interesting point he made where he says that metal often emphasizes individualism, resistance to authority, and rebellion against mainstream norms. And it kind of got me thinking, like, I guess now that nu metal is becoming, more mainstream in our current spaces, or maybe that now that the newer generations are more into activism, or for lack of better words, it's more popular, is now the counterculture conservatism. Like, is that what is no longer mainstream? So you kind of go into that space being like, at some point, what I was saying was shocking, and it was making people uncomfortable, and that's why people liked me. That's why people liked Stained. That's why people liked Limp Bizkit. So is now this new conservative country singing Aaron Lewis like performance that he's kind of putting on, is that the counterculture because it's what's not popular?
The allure of nu metal then wouldn't be because it's doesn't have a coherent political ideology. It's because it is countercultural regardless of where it sits. Exactly. And now the it has shifted sides, and they're just motivated by like, I just want to be countercultural.
I want to be different. I want to stand out,
regardless of what the impact is on the world in terms of like releasing MAGA propaganda. Although again, I fully believe he believes in what he's doing.
Oh, 100%. I found
it's way too earnest to be anything but. It's so earnest as to look like parody, which is why it has to be sincere. In this record, I don't see humor like in Break the Cycle or his new music. So it's you have to take it at face value. But again, like, I don't agree with the guy, but he's working through some things. Clearly emotional troubles.
He's just a confused guy. And just on the topic of parody, I have to read out this quote that I found.
Yeah, please.
On, it was an interview asking about kind of if he's always been conservative or if this is a recent change. And he says, I can't say that I was always a conservative. I mean, when you're younger, there's an old saying that when you're young, if you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart. And then when you're older, if you're still a liberal, you don't have a brain. But what happened was that I got older. I've been around for the entire metamorphosis of this country. He's basically saying, like, he's seen what the internet has done to society. Mm-hmm. Then he adds, which was my favorite part of the interview, Truth Social is the first actual account that I've ever had. So I guess sitting back and not being so engulfed in all the social media phenomenon, I guess I didn't get brainwashed as badly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess he didn't just get brainwashed as badly, huh?
Yeah, no. Only, starting off his social media career with Truth Social.
Yeah. The legitimate social media platform. Okay. That was satire, by the way. To close this, how does this record hold up today? We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I do not think very well. I put this on for the first time in 23 years, hoping that I'd be like, maybe this is a hidden gem. And I have to say, I don't think it is. I don't think that this brings a lot to the table emotionally, intellectually, formally.
Yep.
There's not a lot happening. I mean, your message to me, which I think was probably sent as you were listening to it for the first time, was Stain Kinda Sucks.
Yep. As Terry said, 4 out of 10.
Yeah, 4 out of 10. 4 out of 10. But I don't just want to be a hater. I strive to not be that kind of critic or cultural pundit because, again, I think this stuff has value to Aaron as much as I disagree with it. And I got to say, in 2001, this affected me. Like, I don't really exist if Stain didn't come out with this song as I do now, right? And so I want to give the biggest benefit of the doubt to this record, to 13 or 14-year-old me and my bandmates, the ones that were not as up to speed and actually enjoyed this album. What is the best thing that this record does? Is there something?
Before this episode, I probably would have said no, but I'll be kind of nice. I think that the discussion we brought up earlier with the fact that it kind of gives you the chance to interpret the feelings and the lyrics on your own, I'll give him that. 13, 14-year-old you can interpret it differently than your other friends did, maybe. But that's honestly all I can say.
I didn't actually have an answer until you started talking, but I will say this. Clearly, throughout the record, Aaron is wrestling with his emotions, his thoughts that are conflicted, that are incoherent. And I think as a teenager, that can also be the case. And maybe there's a therapeutic element to being in that mess with this guy and trying to figure out all the weird things you're feeling about the world and your relationships with your parents and all that stuff. That said, I think the part where this gets bad is if you're not able to move on to something with more substance that allows you to resolve those feelings.
Beautifully
because
said.
Stained will not resolve them for you. It's just you're living in the soup. You don't break the cycle. It's just the cycle.
Yep.
Any closing notes?
I've got nothing. I've said enough.
That's Stained, guys. See you next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to Sonic Subcultures Season 1. This podcast is produced by Marc Lajeunesse and Safa Hachi in conjunction with the Media History Research Center at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada.